My mom called me to ask, "Are these your pubes in the toilet?" "Mom, I'm taking a test. Why are you asking me this?" I whispered into the phone while my professor glared at me. "You left all of your pubes all over the place." She sounded genuinely upset, which was weird for my usually chill mom. "Nah, that couldn't be me. My girl likes bush." I immediately regretted saying that to my mother, but it was true. The professor was walking toward me now, so I hunched over trying to end this bizarre conversation. Mom wasn't done, though. She kept going about finding hair everywhere in my bathroom. The toilet, the sink, even the shower walls. It sounded like someone had given themselves a full body shave. "But there's bloody razors all over the place." Her voice changed from annoyed to concerned. That's when my blood ran cold. I hadn't shaved anything in months. My girlfriend Amy really did prefer my hair. It's like a backshot pillow. And I definitely didn't own any razors anymore. Just an electric trimmer for my face that I kept in my bedroom. The professor was standing right next to me now, but I didn't care about the test anymore. Something was very wrong. If Mom hadn't shaved and I hadn't shaved, then someone else had been in my apartment. Someone who felt comfortable enough to groom themselves in my bathroom and leave their DNA everywhere. "You have to get out of there, Mom. I don't think it's safe to stay." I stood up from my desk. The line went quiet. Not dead, but quiet, like she'd stopped moving. I could hear her breathing getting faster, then slower. Then there was another sound. Footsteps that weren't hers because I could still hear her breathing separately. "Honey, I love you." Her voice was barely a whisper. The phone clattered like she'd dropped it. I heard running sounds, her feet on my hardwood floors, a door slamming, maybe the bedroom or bathroom, then nothing. The call disconnected and I was left staring at my blank screen while 20 students stared at me. I ran out of the classroom and down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. My hands shook as I called 911. The operator answered with that fake calm voice they all use. I tried to explain, but it sounded insane even to me. "Someone broke into my house and left all their pubic hair." I was speed walking to my car. "Are you sure you didn't shave yourself late at night and forget about it?" The operator sounded like she was trying not to laugh. "No! My girlfriend loves my bush. Please, I think someone broke into my home. My mom is still there." I was shouting now. The operator said they'd send someone to check, but her tone made it clear she thought I was either high or pranking her. She kept asking about drug use and whether I'd been drinking. Valuable seconds wasted while my mom was trapped in my apartment with whoever had made themselves at home in my bathroom. I decided waiting for the cops wasn't good enough. My apartment was only 15 minutes from campus if I drove fast. I made it in 8, ran 2 red lights and nearly clipped a minivan, but I didn't care. Mom's car was still in the visitor parking, which made my stomach drop. The scene I pulled up to was nothing like what I expected. 3 patrol cars with lights flashing, an ambulance, and a van I didn't recognize until I saw the words on the side. County Coroner. My legs felt like water as I got out of my car. A cop tried to stop me, but I pushed past him. I needed to see. The entrance to my building was taped off, but I could see through the glass doors. Paramedics were wheeling a gurney out. Not a stretcher with someone who needed help. A gurney with a black bag zipped all the way up. My whole body locked up watching that black bag disappear into the van, and I couldn't make my brain accept what I was seeing. A woman walked up to me wearing a gray blazer with a badge clipped to her belt and bags under her eyes that said she'd been doing this job too long. "Detective Kendra Collins," she said. I barely heard her because I was already moving toward the van, but she grabbed my arm hard enough to stop me. "Sir, I need you to step back. Are you a resident here?" Her grip was firm and professional, but I didn't care about protocol right now. "That's my mom's car." I pointed at the visitor parking with my hand shaking so bad I could barely keep it steady. "She was in my apartment when someone broke in." I called 911, but they didn't believe me about the hair and razors. The words came out in a rush, and I knew I sounded crazy, but I needed her to understand. Detective Collins signaled to another cop and started steering me away from the van that was already closing its doors. "What's your name? Tell me exactly what happened today." She had this calm voice that cops use when they're trying to control a situation, but I was past being controlled. I pulled out my phone and hit redial on the 911 number, putting it on speaker so she could hear the whole thing. "I called them 40 minutes ago about an intruder, and they thought I was pranking them. Now someone's dead." The recording played, and you could hear the operator's dismissive tone when I mentioned the pubic hair, and her asking if I was on drugs while my mom was in danger. Detective Collins took my phone and dropped it in an evidence bag after I nodded. "Okay." She asked me to walk through the call with my mom from the beginning, and I had to explain the embarrassing parts about Amy liking my body hair, which made me want to die. But I told her everything. The test, the weird call about pubes everywhere, the bloody razors I don't own, hearing footsteps that weren't Mom's, then the line going dead. While she was writing notes, I tried calling Amy on her phone, but she didn't pick up, so I left a messy voicemail. "Something happened to Mom. I'm at my apartment with police. Please call me back." My voice cracked, and I hung up before I started crying in front of everyone. Detective Collins walked me to her unmarked car, instead of putting me in a patrol vehicle, which I guess was supposed to make me feel better. She handed me a business card for some victim advocate and said they'd meet us at the station to help me through this. The drive took maybe 10 minutes, but felt like hours with me staring at Mom's missed calls on the evidence bag holding my phone. At the precinct, she led me to a small room with a table and plastic chairs that looked like every interrogation room from every cop show. I went through the whole story again from the beginning while she recorded it. The test in my economics class, the phone ringing, my professor getting mad, Mom yelling about pubic hair, me saying that thing about Amy, realizing someone else had been in my bathroom, the fear in Mom's voice, the footsteps, her saying she loved me, then nothing. I showed her my class schedule on the computer to prove I was really in that exam when everything happened. She stepped out for a minute and came back saying they'd contacted my professor who confirmed I was acting weird during the test. He remembered me on the phone looking panicked and then running out of the classroom like the building was on fire. He even told them about me yelling into my phone about someone breaking in, which helped prove I wasn't making this up after the fact. The detective asked about my apartment and who had keys and whether I'd noticed anything strange lately. I told her just me and Amy had keys unless you counted the building manager who had a master, but I'd never had problems before. She wanted to know about Mom and why she was at my place, so I explained she was supposed to help me clean before Amy came over for our anniversary dinner tonight, which now obviously wasn't happening. Detective Collins kept asking about the hair and razors like she was trying to make sense of it too. I explained again that I hadn't shaved anything in months because Amy genuinely preferred me natural, and I only owned an electric trimmer for my face that I kept in my bedroom, not the bathroom. She asked if Mom might have shaved for some reason, but that made even less sense because Mom was almost 70 and had been complaining about her arthritis lately, so there's no way she'd be doing any complicated grooming in my bathroom. Plus, she had her own house with her own bathroom 20 minutes away, so why would she shave at my place? The detective wrote everything down and said crime scene techs were processing my apartment and they'd know more soon. She asked if I had somewhere to stay since my apartment was now a crime scene, and I realized I hadn't even thought about that. My wallet was in my pocket, but everything else I owned was in that apartment where Mom had just died. The victim advocate finally showed up and started talking about grief counseling and support groups, but I couldn't focus on any of it. All I could think about was Mom's voice saying she loved me, and then silence. The door opened and a CSI tech walked in carrying a tablet and evidence bags. He showed Detective Collins photos on the screen while I sat there trying not to look at the blood under his fingernails. The tech said they found hair covering every surface in my bathroom, like someone had gone crazy with clippers. They bagged 12 bloody razors from my trash can, and the field tests showed the blood wasn't fresh enough to be from today. Detective Collins turned to me and said I couldn't go back to my apartment while they processed the scene. She slid a paper across the table with emergency housing numbers and shelter addresses. I pulled out my phone to call my building manager, Colton Travis, but it went straight to voicemail. I left him a message asking how the hell someone got into my apartment without breaking the door or windows. My voice got louder as I talked until I was basically yelling at his voicemail about his shitty security. The detective walked me out to the parking lot, and I saw Mom's Honda sitting there in visitor parking where she always parked it. I walked over and stood next to the driver door, but couldn't make myself touch the handle. She was there because I'd complained about needing help cleaning before Amy came over for our anniversary. She died because I whined about some stupid pubes in my bathroom. The guilt hit me so hard, I had to lean against her car to stay standing. Detective Collins gave me a ride to a motel near campus, since I only had my wallet and the clothes I was wearing. The place was one of those sketchy motels with peeling paint and a broken ice machine, but it was close and cheap. I paid for 3 nights with my credit card and stumbled to room 114. The bed had this musty smell, but I collapsed on it fully dressed and just lay there staring at the water stains on the ceiling. Everything from the last few hours crashed down on me at once. I got up to use the bathroom, and the second I stepped inside, I saw Mom's face in my mind. Her voice on the phone saying she loved me kept playing over and over. I dropped to my knees next to the toilet and started sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. My stomach turned and I threw up everything from breakfast while tears ran down my face. After there was nothing left to throw up, I just curled up on the cold tile floor and stayed there for hours. The next morning, Detective Collins picked me up to go back to my apartment for clothes and stuff. The whole place was covered in yellow tape and black fingerprint dust. My bathroom looked like a crime show with numbered evidence markers everywhere. Little yellow triangles marked spots on the floor and walls where they'd found evidence. I opened my medicine cabinet to grab my toothbrush and noticed all my cheap disposable razors were gone. The whole pack I'd bought months ago and never opened was missing from the shelf. But my Xbox was still hooked up to the TV, and my laptop was on my desk untouched. Whoever broke in didn't care about stealing anything worth money. They just wanted to shave in my bathroom for some sick reason. Detective Collins was watching me pack when her phone rang. She stepped into the hallway to talk, but I could still hear parts of the conversation. When she came back, she told me the medical examiner found Mom died from blunt force trauma to her head, 1 hit to the temple with something heavy. The blood on those razors definitely wasn't Mom's, which meant whoever was in my apartment cut themselves while shaving. Standing there in my bathroom looking at all those evidence markers, I could see it in my head. Mom walking in and finding some stranger's hair everywhere. Hearing footsteps behind her. Turning around to see someone she didn't know in my apartment. For the first time since this happened, The grief got pushed down by something else. Pure rage at whoever did this to her. Detective Collins pulled out a DNA kit from her bag and asked if she could swab my cheek to rule me out from the evidence. I opened my mouth and let her run the cotton swab inside my cheek for 30 seconds. She sealed it in a plastic tube and wrote my name on the label while I watched her hands move. I asked if I could get copies of the 911 call I made and the dispatch logs from this morning. She shook her head and told me I'd need to file a formal records request with the county office. The red tape made me want to punch something, but I just nodded and wrote down the address she gave me. My phone buzzed with a call from Colton Travis, my building manager who I'd left that angry voicemail for earlier. He started talking fast about how the lobby cameras were down for maintenance yesterday, which seemed way too convenient. I pressed him about who had access to the master keys for the building, but he got weird and evasive. He kept saying he'd have to check the records and get back to me, which was total BS. Detective Collins drove me back to the motel, and I walked through the parking lot feeling like everyone was watching me. In the hallway, I ran into my neighbor Myra Meeks, who lived 2 doors down from my apartment. She grabbed my arm and started saying how sorry she was about what happened to my mom. Then she mentioned something that made me stop walking completely. She said she saw a woman with a small toiletry bag near my door yesterday morning around 9. The woman had seemed normal, so Myra didn't think anything weird about it at the time. I asked her to describe the woman, but Myra could only remember she was wearing dark clothes and seemed to be in a hurry. After Myra left, I realized I needed to get my class materials from campus since I'd run out during the test. The drive to the school felt strange, like I was watching myself from outside my body. My professor was in his office grading papers when I knocked on his doorframe. He looked up and his face changed when he saw me standing there. He told me he'd heard what happened and asked if I was okay, which was such a dumb question. I grabbed my backpack from the classroom where I'd left it, and the test paper was still on my desk. Being in that normal classroom for even 5 minutes felt completely wrong after everything that had happened today. My phone rang as I walked back to my car, and Amy's name showed up on the screen. I answered, and she started crying immediately, saying she'd heard about my mom from someone on campus. But then I ruined everything by asking if she'd given our spare key to anyone recently. My voice came out harsh and accusing, even though I didn't mean it that way. She got quiet and asked why I would even think she'd do something like that. I tried to explain about the hair and the razors, but it came out all wrong and paranoid sounding. She said I was scaring her and hung up before I could apologize or explain better. Back at the motel, I was lying on the bed when Detective Collins called with an update from the crime lab. The DNA from all that pubic hair was definitely female, but didn't match anyone in their criminal database. We were looking for an unknown woman who'd been in my apartment shaving herself for some sick reason. Collins mentioned something else that made my skin crawl about the building using temporary cleaning crews lately. The staffing company had been sending different workers every few days due to some shortage issue. These temp workers would have had access to master keys during their shifts to clean the common areas. She said she was going to request all the employee records and key fob logs from building management immediately. When she called Colton about it, though, he started stalling and saying he needed to check with corporate lawyers first. The detective sounded frustrated when she told me this, and said Colton was being unusually difficult about cooperating. That night in the motel, I couldn't sleep at all and kept checking the locks on my door. Every time someone walked past in the hallway, my whole body tensed up waiting for them to stop. I pulled out my phone and started Googling similar cases of people breaking into homes just to use the bathroom. There were more stories than I expected about people finding strangers had been living in their houses secretly. Some woman in Japan lived in a guy's closet for a whole year before he caught her on camera. Another case in North Carolina had someone living in the attic and coming down at night to eat food. The more I read, the more my anxiety got worse thinking about how long this person might have been using my apartment. What if they'd been coming in for weeks or months while I was at class or work? What if they had copies of my key and could get into other apartments in the building too? My hands were shaking as I scrolled through article after article about home invasions and stalking cases. None of them ended with the victim's mom getting killed though, which made my situation feel even more messed up. The motel room felt too small, and the walls seemed to be closing in on me as I sat there. I got up and walked to the window to look outside at the empty parking lot below. Every car that drove by made me wonder if it was the woman who'd been in my apartment coming back. The fear mixed with anger, until I couldn't tell which feeling was stronger anymore. I wanted to find this person and make them pay for what they did to Mom, but I was also scared of them. The next morning, Detective Collins called and told me to meet her at the building, because Colton had finally agreed to talk about the key situation. I drove over and found them in the lobby with Colton looking nervous and sweating through his cheap button-up shirt. He kept wiping his hands on his pants while Collins stared him down with her arms crossed. After 20 minutes of her pressing him, Colton finally cracked and admitted they'd been using an unregistered cleaning crew for the past few weeks to save money. The crew had borrowed master keys without proper logging, and nobody tracked when they had them or which units they entered. Collins wrote everything down while Colton kept saying it was just for a few weeks, and the regular service was too expensive. I stood up and got in his face, yelling that his cheap shortcuts got my mom killed. My fist was already pulling back when a patrol officer grabbed my arm and pulled me away from Colton, who stumbled backward into the wall. Collins warned me to let her handle it and threatened to arrest me if I didn't calm down immediately. She sent me outside to cool off while she finished with Colton, but I could still see them through the glass doors. Later that afternoon, Collins called with news that a business across the street had security cameras that caught part of our building's side entrance. The footage showed a white cleaning van parked there at an odd hour when no cleaning was scheduled. The plates were only partially visible, but it was enough to start checking rental companies in the area. That's when I remembered something from the crime scene that suddenly seemed important. The CSI team had bagged a crumpled pharmacy receipt from my bathroom trash that I'd seen them photograph. I called Collins and asked her to check if it had purchase info for razors, since I knew I hadn't bought any. She said she'd look into it, but sounded annoyed that I was still trying to help with the investigation. I couldn't just sit around waiting, so I drove to the pharmacy near my apartment to ask questions myself. The clerk behind the counter was this older guy who'd worked there forever and actually remembered a woman buying disposable razors yesterday morning. She'd paid cash but stood out because she seemed really nervous and kept looking over her shoulder the whole time. He said she had a noticeable limp favoring her left leg and wore dark clothes with a baseball cap pulled low. Collins called me an hour later and scolded me for interfering with her investigation by going to the pharmacy myself. She took my statement about what the clerk told me, but warned that I needed to stay out of it before I messed something up. Then she admitted my tips had actually been helpful, but said she couldn't have me running around playing detective while she was trying to work. The next day, she called with a major update from the staffing agency that provided temps to our building. They'd given her a list of everyone who worked that week, and one woman matched both the van rental records and the shift timing. Her employment file had an address and phone number, but when they tried to contact her, nobody answered. 2 weeks passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork I never imagined dealing with at my age. Getting Mom's body released from the medical examiner required forms and signatures and waiting periods that felt endless. The funeral home needed decisions about services and burial plots and caskets that I couldn't afford even with the cheapest options. I finally met with the medical examiner Albert Coffey in his cold office that smelled like chemicals and coffee. He was this tall, thin man with gray hair who spoke in a quiet voice while explaining how Mom died. She'd been hit once in the temple with something blunt and heavy, maybe a lamp or similar object from my apartment. He said it was quick, which was supposed to make me feel better, but didn't really help at all. Then he mentioned something that hit me harder than anything else he'd said about her death. Mom had defensive wounds on her hands and forearms, which meant she'd fought back against whoever attacked her. There were cuts and bruises showing she'd tried to protect herself and hadn't just given up when cornered. Part of me felt proud that she'd fought even while my heart broke thinking about her final moments alone with her killer. The next week, my lease renewal notice showed up in my email, and just looking at it made my chest tight. I drove to the apartment to start packing, but walking through those rooms felt like drowning in thick air. Every corner had Mom's ghost standing there, asking about the hair while footsteps crept behind her. I grabbed boxes from the storage unit and started throwing stuff in without sorting anything. Myra knocked while I was taping up the third box, and when I opened the door, she looked nervous but determined. She told me she'd been thinking more about that woman she saw and remembered new details that might help. The woman definitely had a bad limp, favoring her left leg, and she was carrying this small toiletry kit. Not the big cleaning cart the regular crew uses. She kept looking around like she was checking if anyone was watching her go into my place. I thanked Myra and immediately texted Collins about the new details. My phone buzzed with an email from Colton while I was still standing there, and his message made my blood boil. He claimed the lobby cameras were down for maintenance that day, but then admitted the alley cameras were actually working fine. His story kept changing every time he talked, and the contradictions were getting more obvious. I forwarded everything to Collins, who called me 20 minutes later, saying she'd pulled the alley footage. The video showed a woman leaving my building carrying a bag right around the time Mom died. The angle caught part of her vehicle's license plate, even though the quality was grainy. Collins said they were running the partial through DMV records to find matches. 3 days later, she called with an update that the partial plate matched 3 possible vendor vans in the state database. The staffing agency confirmed one of those vans was assigned to a woman who'd worked temp shifts at my building that week. They had an address on file from her employment paperwork, and Collins said they were heading there immediately. I wanted to go with them, but she shut that down hard. Later that afternoon, Collins called back, sounding frustrated, because when detectives got to the address, the woman was already gone. Her mailbox was stuffed full of past due bills and collection notices going back weeks. The neighbors said she'd disappeared about 3 weeks ago, left in the middle of the night with just a couple bags. The landlord was already trying to evict her for non-payment and had no forwarding address. The victim advocate from the prosecutor's office met me at a coffee shop near campus the next day. She was this older woman with kind eyes who explained how slow everything would move from here. Even with a suspect identified, actually finding her and making an arrest could take months. If they did catch her, the trial might not happen for a year or more because of court backlogs. She handed me pamphlets about grief counseling and victim compensation funds that might help with funeral costs. I stuffed them in my backpack without really looking at them. Amy showed up at my motel room that night and we immediately started fighting. She said I was being paranoid and pushing everyone away, that I'd basically accused her of giving someone our key. I yelled back that she didn't understand what it was like finding out your mom died because of some psycho who wanted to shave in your bathroom. She said I was scaring her with how angry I'd become, and that she couldn't handle me like this. We both knew it was over, even though neither of us actually said the words. She left crying, and I threw the remote at the wall hard enough to crack the plastic. The next morning, I went to the police station to file a formal complaint about the 911 operator who'd dismissed my call. The desk sergeant gave me forms to fill out and said someone from internal affairs would review it. I wrote down everything, how she'd laughed at me, asked about drugs, wasted time while Mom was attacked. If they'd taken me seriously and sent patrol immediately, maybe they would have arrived before Mom got hurt. The sergeant took my forms and said I'd hear back in 6 to 8 weeks. 2 nights later, I went to a neighborhood safety meeting at the community center near my building. The room was packed with residents I'd never seen before, all talking about break-ins and thefts. One woman said her apartment was robbed while she was at work, and management did nothing. An old man described finding strangers in the laundry room at weird hours, who ran when he asked what unit they lived in. A couple said their storage unit lock was cut and expensive bikes stolen, but Colton claimed the cameras weren't working that day either. Person after person stood up, describing security failures going back months. The building's problems went way deeper than just my apartment, and Colton had been covering it up to avoid corporate getting involved. Some lawyer in the crowd started talking about a class action lawsuit and passed around a sign-up sheet. I wrote my name and left feeling sick that Mom died because of systematic neglect that everyone knew about, but nobody fixed. 3 days later, my phone rang while I was eating cold pizza in the motel room, and Myra's name popped up on the screen. She was talking so fast I could barely understand her, but I caught the important parts about seeing that same woman with the limp near our building's dumpsters right now. I told her to hang up and call 911 while I grabbed my keys and ran to my car. The drive took 12 minutes even though I was speeding the whole way, and when I pulled into the parking lot, 2 patrol cars were already there, with their lights going. I jumped out and ran toward the dumpster area where 3 cops were standing around looking frustrated. One of them recognized me from before and explained that the woman had taken off down the alley when she saw the patrol cars coming. I started running down the alley myself, even though the cops yelled at me to stop, but she was already gone. Walking back, I noticed something on the ground near where the dumpster met the brick wall. A small black toiletry bag was sitting there half open with stuff spilling out. I called the cops over and pointed without touching anything because I'd learned my lesson about evidence. They put on gloves and picked it up carefully while I watched from a few feet away. Inside the bag, they pulled out some razors still in packaging and a small piece of plastic that looked like part of an ID badge. The fragment showed part of a photo of a woman's face and the first 3 letters of a name that started with M-A-R. Detective Collins showed up 20 minutes later and took one look at the bag before telling me this was exactly what they needed to move forward. She bagged everything and said the temp agency logo on the ID fragment matched the company that supplied workers to my building. 2 weeks passed with no news until Collins called me on a Tuesday afternoon saying they'd arrested the suspect in a grocery store 2 towns over for shoplifting. The woman's fingerprints matched the ones from my bathroom, and the lab confirmed her DNA matched all that hair she'd left behind. Collins came by the motel the next day to share what she could about the interrogation, even though she wasn't supposed to tell me much. The woman had admitted to using my apartment multiple times when she thought nobody would be home because she was living in her van and needed somewhere to clean up. She said when Mom walked in on her that day, she was in the middle of shaving and just panicked. The woman claimed she only meant to push Mom out of the way so she could run, but Mom hit her head on the bathtub edge when she fell. Collins said the woman kept crying during the interrogation, saying she never meant to hurt anyone, and it was just an accident. The district attorney's office called me a week later to schedule a meeting about the charges they were filing. The prosecutor was this older guy who explained they were charging her with involuntary manslaughter and burglary, but the defense attorney was already signaling they wanted to negotiate a plea deal. He said trials were expensive and risky, and if we went to court, there was always a chance the jury might acquit her completely. The idea of her walking free made me sick, but he said a plea deal would guarantee at least some prison time. 4 months after Mom died, I stood in a courtroom reading my victim impact statement with my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the paper. I talked about how Mom had been my biggest supporter through college and how she'd driven 2 hours just to clean my apartment because she wanted to help. I described the empty chair at graduation where she should have been and how I still picked up my phone to call her every day. My voice cracked when I got to the part about identifying her body at the morgue, but I kept going because the judge needed to hear it all. The woman who killed her sat at the defense table crying, but I couldn't look at her directly. When I finished, the judge thanked me and said he'd take my statement into consideration. The judge accepted the plea deal for involuntary manslaughter with a sentence of 3 to 5 years, which the prosecutor had warned me was typical for this kind of case. It felt like nothing for taking someone's life, but everyone kept telling me it was better than risking a trial where she might get off completely. After the sentencing, I met with a lawyer about filing a civil lawsuit against the building for negligent security. He looked through all my documentation about Colton's lies and the missing key logs and said we had a really strong case. The lawyer explained that the building's insurance company would probably want to settle rather than go to court where a jury might award even more money. He was right, because 2 months later, the insurance company offered a settlement that included enough money to finish school and start over somewhere else. The catch was signing a non-disclosure agreement that meant I couldn't talk publicly about what happened or post anything online about the building's security failures. I signed it anyway, because I needed to move forward, and the money would let me transfer to a different school where nobody knew my story. Colton had already been fired by then, according to Myra, who kept me updated on building news even though I'd moved to a motel across town. The settlement money came through 3 weeks later, and I used it to pay off the rest of my lease early. Move-out day arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning, and I had to go back to the building one last time. Colton was working his last week before they replaced him with someone from a real security company. I walked into the office and put my keys on the counter without saying anything. He looked up from his computer, and our eyes met for maybe 2 seconds. Neither of us said a word beyond him, asking if I had both copies, and me saying yes. I turned around and walked out without looking back at him or the building. Myra had texted me the night before, offering to help pack up Mom's stuff from my apartment. She showed up at 8 in the morning with a box of sandwiches and a roll of packing tape. We worked for 6 hours straight boxing up Mom's clothes and the little things she'd brought over to help clean. Myra didn't try to make small talk or ask how I was doing, which I appreciated. She just helped me wrap Mom's coffee mug in newspaper and pack her favorite sweater that still smelled like her perfume. When we finished loading everything into my car, Myra gave me a quick hug and said she was sorry about everything. The 911 supervisor finally called me back about my complaint after I'd sent 3 follow-up emails. She said they'd reviewed the call, and the operator had been retrained on proper emergency response protocols. She apologized for how the situation was handled, but her voice sounded like she was reading from a script. I told her it was too late for apologies and hung up before she could finish her prepared statement. Campus counseling had a 3-week wait list, but they squeezed me in after I explained what happened. The therapist was this older woman who specialized in trauma, and she helped me understand why I kept checking locks 5 times before bed. We made a list of small goals like taking a shower without leaving the bathroom door open so I could hear if someone came in. It took 2 months before I could check off even half the things on that list. 7 months after Mom died, I finally unpacked her coffee mug in my new apartment across town. I put it on the kitchen counter next to a vanilla candle and lit it while I made breakfast. The grief didn't knock me over anymore, but it was always there, like background music you can't turn off. I spent a whole weekend installing new deadbolts on my door and setting up a camera system I bought online. The self-defense class at the community center met every Thursday, and I went to every single session. Learning how to break someone's grip or throw a proper punch made me feel less helpless than before. Detective Collins sent me a text 8 months after everything saying the case was officially closed since the woman took the plea deal. She asked if I wanted to be notified about parole hearings when they came up in a few years. I thought about it for a whole day before texting back that I didn't want any updates. I needed to move forward without tracking every detail of what happened to the person who killed Mom. My new apartment had a smaller bathroom with a clear shower door instead of a curtain. 8 months after losing Mom, I could finally brush my teeth without checking behind the door first. I still looked twice sometimes when I heard a noise, but I didn't have to search every corner before using the toilet. The hypervigilance wasn't completely gone, but it was getting better week by week. My therapist said healing wasn't a straight line, and some days would be harder than others. She was right, because sometimes I still woke up in a panic thinking I heard someone in my apartment. But most mornings I could make coffee in Mom's mug without crying, and that felt like progress. All right, that's a wrap on today's little journey. Really appreciate you hanging out and wondering through all this with me. Hope to see you back here again soon. Like the video, it helps more than you think.